After the big announcement, candidate for governor of 2026 on the Republican side. Really happy to have on Scott Schwab. Scott, congratulations on the announcement, my friend. How are you?
I'm tired, but we're good. Thanks, Andy, for having me on. Yeah, it was a big day. A lot of work went into January 8th having a big announcement. Didn't anticipate a snowstorm killing the news cycle for everybody but our campaign. So I'll take the earned media where I can get it, but it was a good day. It seems like we're getting really positive feedback on the announcement.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we were just talking a little bit. I mean, we're, a year and a half away from that race, so it's starting off quick and hard. It is going to be a wild one, but I'm excited to see the energy from the Republican side of the aisle, especially because Governor Kelly has been such a disaster for the past few years that it's going to be nice to hopefully be able to see a Republican back in office and actually get some things done at a faster manner in our legislative sessions.
Well, that's what we'd like to see. And there's some things that, Kansans want that haven't happened. Property tax is a problem, and I know the legislature is going to try to address some of that this session. But with the divided government, the legislature is not going to get mostly what it wants because they're going to have to navigate and negotiate with a Democrat governor, and that's just the current political construct. Yeah. But our hope is to change that in 2020 after November 2026.
Yeah. Let's talk about the session here for just a moment. Like you said, I mean, the nice news is we did have some big victories in the last election. We gained some seats in the House. We gained some seats in the Senate. Speaker of the House, Dan Hawkins, said that now we have what he's calling a, quote, functioning supermajority as opposed to having a supermajority but not being able to do much with it. Are you anticipating in this session the legislature really having to override massive amounts of vetoes from Governor Kelly? And I have a bid going on the program right now that with the supermajority that we have and how she's kind of on her way out and wants to stop whatever she can, I have an over-under of 30 vetoes that she's going to try this session that we can override. What do you think?
I think it's going to be under. They have shortened the session so much that it's going to be hard to get too much done. They've shortened the session by several weeks. And this is a new legislature, so there's no leftover bills from last session. They all died because it's a completely new House and a completely new Senate. So it takes a while to get those bills printed, let alone get them assigned to committee, have a hearing, work the bill, get them to the floor, get them to the other chamber, go to conference, and then get it to her desk. Yeah. I don't think there's going to be time for 30 vetoes, but there will be some. And I mean, I'm sure the governor is going to probably want to veto maybe even something small just to test that supermajority to see if it's as functional as Dan's hoping it is.
That would be interesting to see if she does test it. But I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that she recognizes that there was a statement that was made in the election and that she's not as popular as what she thinks and that she can't really implement her agenda. She's not going to get Medicaid expansion. She's not going to get some of the other issues that she's wanted. So hopefully she's more willing to work with Republicans than before, but I highly doubt it.
Yeah, I found out that trying to predict what the legislature and the governor is going to do is not a profitable proposition. It will be interesting to see. And whatever happens over the next 3-4 weeks will set the tone for not only this session, but next year as well.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, talking about the governor's race, obviously, the transition that we see there, what would be, right now, your Secretary of State, you've been focused on businesses in the state and proper registration. You've been focused on elections, which I think went very smoothly in November. We saw a great turnout. Transitioning from that particular mindset and being tunnel visioned into those issues, if you become governor, what would that look like? What would be the priorities that you would want to focus on and see as a governor for the state of Kansas?
Well, some of it is stuff that Republicans have been trying to advocate for years, but again, the Democrat administration just wouldn't play. But obviously property taxes have to be addressed because they're really squishing people. But also might have to look at the way we appraise because appraisals go up to the market. But the seniors are on fixed income. It's not a survivable model. And so I don't know. We've got some ideas, but we want to let you do what they want to do this session before we start launching specifics and policy. But there has to be a way to address this, or else we're going to have another housing market crash. And that's not going to be for anybody who lived through the '08 one knows that this is not going to be a good thing if this continues down that road. And other concerns that we have is we now know that we can't always trust Washington, D.C. to have our back. And our military bases are vital to our community and also vital to our economy. And the notion that it's okay for China to buy property and farmland around our bases is terrifying. And the Wall Street Journal even said the other day that there are more Chinese businesses that they're finding out that are actually arms of the Chinese military that are trying to acquire things in the West. So we need to do our part as a state because we don't, we got a federal government right now that can't even tell whether it's a balloon flying over the country, right? So then we're just going to $30,000 missile to shoot it down when my kid could do it with a BB gun. Yeah. But the other thing that's really important, and I think there's a hunger for Kansans, and this is what I've learned from the last 6.5, 7 years of being Secretary of State, is they want governmental leaders that have deep convictions. Even if they don't always agree with their convictions, they want them predictable. They don't want an erratic government or erratic leaders in government. Yeah. And they want to know they have deeply held beliefs so that they know that their government leaders care about them because they have these deeply held convictions. And ever since we lost our son, I've been very public about my faith and our convictions because that's what's gotten us through some pretty tough times. And all that being said is I think the people of Kansas, even though we don't always agree on core values, they always admire leaders that have.
That's a great point. Moving forward, you mentioned, the government not being able to have our back on certain issues. Is there an opportunity in Kansas, maybe in this legislative session, maybe after we get a Republican governor and we can have a little bit better leadership from the executive branch, of working on limiting the influence that the federal government has? And what I mean by that is not having as much federal money coming in, not having the federal government dangle different programs over our head that if you're going to get this federal funding or this federal grant, then you have to do things our particular way. That mob-like mentality that we usually get from the federal government. Can we get back to an idea of federalism? Can we get back to an idea of the states being a little bit more sovereign and being a little bit more independent?
Well, I would like to think so. It'll be a challenge because once this is part of the reason why I've been an advocate of making sure our agency as Secretary of State doesn't get any state general fund dollars, because once you get it, you're addicted to it. We have state agencies that are addicted to federal money. And so once they're on it, it's hard to cut it. So the goal is to not expand that. We've been pretty good in this office. I get criticized by some of my other secretaries across the country that I tell the Congress, don't give us any more federal dollars for elections because I don't want the strings that come with it. And our election system is the most ideal federalized system in America right now. It is run by counties on the local level. It's run by your neighbors. And, I get frustrated when people accuse us of this massive conspiracy of fraud in Kansas and voter fraud. It's like, go talk to your neighbors. They're the ones running the election. Yeah. All I do is sign it and make sure they follow the rules. That's a big issue as it relates to Secretary of State to not get those federal dollars. Yeah. Once you get to the governor's office, you're going to have to do the same thing because the goal of the Republican Party is to reduce government dependency. And we have more people dependent on government now than we ever have in the history of the country. And that trend has to change. And it starts with D.C., but absolutely Kansas plays a role. Yeah. By saying thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, like you said, we are the leading edge right now when it comes to voter integrity and voter security, which is nice. On the election front, and I don't want to throw it out there and surprise you with it because I haven't talked to you about this before, but just kind of an immediate response I'd love to pick your brain and get your thoughts on. I've filed personally a 501c4 of working on a new idea, trying to bring a lot more representation to the state by different districts and where we're at because of the rural populations versus the largely populated areas, of starting a conversation about having an electoral college process at a statewide level for statewide races. Is that a plausible thing? Is that possible even though it's probably going to be a very difficult thing to try to implement? But do you think that would help balance out some of the votes that we have in the state based on rural communities and largely populated areas in Kansas?
I understand. I appreciate the attempt. It would take a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
And I don't see you getting majorities in both chambers to pass that out, supermajorities to pass that out, let alone then it goes to the ballot of the people to do that. When I first came to the State House in 2003, it was the first time there were more urban legislators than they were rural legislators. And it's just grown from there. The way you balance that, and I think there is already some balance there because there's people like me who grew up in Great Bend, Kansas, and appreciates my rural town roots. And, I went to college at Fort Hays State. We hunted before we went to school in the morning. That was our culture. And now I live in Johnson County, and I respect what Johnson County needs, but I never forgot what was important to rural America. And I think most legislators are that way. They don't want to roll over rural America. They are concerned with the contraction of western Kansas and southeast Kansas. But that being said, I think where the balance really fights coming in the legislature seems to be between the metro areas. Johnson County against Wichita or against Shawnee or against Wyandotte County, east versus west. That's where you have the small spats. But by and large, when it comes to doing what's best for Kansas. Dan and Ty both do a good job of making sure that Western Kansas is fairly represented.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, we're talking with Scott Schwab, Kansas Secretary of State candidate for governor as well for 2026. It is interesting to see how things play out. What boggles my mind is like Governor Kelly, when she won the governorship, she won with like 7 counties or 9 counties out of all of the counties that we have. I mean, and those seem to be the focal point. If you can win a couple of those swing, especially here in Sedgwick County, where I'm based out of, then like that's how you win the governor's race. And to me, that just seems kind of weird. And can we find ways to balance out some of those ideas? But you're right. I think we are seeing a decent representation. Can we make it more fair?
I think we can. Let's not forget that we have 2 U.S. senators from rural Kansas. So it's not that you can't have, and being from rural Kansas is very, very important. Now, this is the first election cycle. Like when I ran for re-election for Secretary of State, they'd say, well, you got a good chance because you're from Johnson County, because you have to play well in Johnson County.
Right.
But that's more of a new dynamic as opposed to before. Is you always had to win the big first.
Sure.
And that's still true today. But for a Democrat to win, they have to focus on those population centers. But for a Republican to win a primary, you got to focus everywhere.
Yeah, it's a great point. Let's shift gears a little bit. You mentioned some of the priorities for the legislature this year. Obviously, property tax is one of those, releasing those property tax burdens. We just saw the end of the sales tax on food, and at the beginning of this year for 2025, as governor or even with the legislature this year, is there an opportunity to push the tax reform even a little bit better? I know they want to do more property tax reform, but could we go to eventually an ending of income tax, getting rid of property tax altogether, focusing on a sales tax plan? Could we see potential major reforms of the tax system here in Kansas for the long term?
I don't see. So we tried to get rid of income tax once, and it almost bankrupted the state. But we went too quick. What I learned coming from the Brownback experiment was you can't do massive tax cuts and expect to get a shot in the arm immediately. What you do is you base your tax policy on good economics, knowing it's going to help the next generation be able to do more. If you try these drastic changes, then people get upset. It's going to affect the economy normally in a negative way. And then if it starts affecting your bond rating, because the best way for us to have sustainability as a state is growth. The best opportunity for us to cut taxes long-term in larger amounts is growth.
Right.
And so we have to focus on growth and use a tax policy that grows the economy so that we can have those deeper cuts. You can't just say, hey, if we get rid of income tax today and go to consumption, we'll be fine. Because most economists will tell you, you can't do that drastic of a change and not have negative effects in the short term. And what happens is when you do it in the short term, then all the people who passed the bill got voted out. New people come in, they reinstate the tax, and then you lost what you had.
Yeah, it's we definitely saw that shock factor under the Brownback system, and it got a lot of pushback, and it took us, I think it delayed some of the tax reforms that we could have had in a substantial manner moving forward. Last question for you as we continue to move forward.
More patient with it, yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Doing it long form and doing it, like you said, in a little more patient manner, then we can see some reforms. We just got to do it in a maybe a little bit smarter manner for sure. Moving forward, when it comes to the campaign itself, I know obviously it's early. We're still going through the session this year, and there's only, I believe, one other candidate for governor right now that's in the race. When do you think, in your mind, is the campaign really going to start ramping up? And when do we see you start hitting the roads and talking to people across the state?
I think you'll see more of that in the summer, when a lot of your Republican picnics and county picnics and parades and stuff like that happen. Between now and then, I mean, let's just be realistic. It's about making sure people will contribute to the campaign. I've always said, people put their money where their heart is. And if people want me to be governor, they're going to contribute. And right now it's been good since we've announced. We've been raising money and paying our bills, which is, you want to be able to do that. Kind of important, but I really think come next fall, you'll see significant more activity, and not just governor's race. Obviously, I'm not running for Secretary of State again, so you'll see some people probably filing for this office, and then there'll be some Democrats vote for applying for statewide. Obviously, there's going to be a contested third district race, because there always is in CD3 in Kansas. So I think by this fall, you'll see significantly more activity.
I'm excited. I'm excited for the midterms next year. I think that especially what's going to happen this year in our session, what's going to happen in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of Republican momentum right now. And if we do what we say we're going to do at the state level and the federal level, then we're in a really good position for Republicans across the board to go into midterms next year and continue that agenda. So that is optimistic. That's encouraging. We just have to see the action actually play things out. And I think that's going to go in your favor and so many others as well. So I'm excited for you, my friend. It is Scott Schwab, Kansas Secretary of State, former legislator. You and I have been friends for a long time. We've talked since you've been a state legislature, so congrats on the announcement. As you get closer to the campaign and you start releasing some more policy stuff, we'll get you back on the program. Talk to you again real soon, brother.